the mission that almost killed astronauts, an explosion in space, a desperate fight for survival.
Hello friends! On April 11th, 1970, a rocket carrying the Apollo 13 mission lifted off from Kennedy Space Center in the United States. 3 astronauts were aboard, heading toward the moon. Remarkably, less than a year had passed since Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the lunar surface. Apollo 13 was NASA's 3rd crewed mission to the moon. Confident after the success of the previous 2 missions, the astronauts dreamed of setting foot on the moon themselves. However, they had no idea that their dream would never be fulfilled. About 330,000 kilometers from Earth in April 1970, a sudden loud explosion rocked the spacecraft. Alarms blared, warning lights flashed, and the astronauts quickly realized that one oxygen tank had exploded and another was leaking rapidly. "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." "This is Houston. Say again, please." "Houston, we have a problem." The ground control initially thought the readings were a malfunction, but the astronauts could clearly see air escaping into space. The explosion had also pushed the spacecraft off its intended path, sending it further from Earth with every passing second. Within hours, Apollo 13 set a record for the farthest distance humans had ever traveled from Earth, a record that still stands today. Landing on the moon was no longer the priority. The main concern became survival. Carbon dioxide levels in the spacecraft were rising, and the astronauts were beginning to experience serious effects. It was a dire emergency. This mission must also be understood in the context of the space race. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy promised that the U.S. would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade ended. By 1969, both Apollo 11 and Apollo 12 had succeeded. However, public interest in moon missions waned after the first landing, and NASA's budget was reduced, leading to the cancellation of future missions such as Apollo 20. Apollo 13 therefore carried extra importance. NASA not only aimed to study the moon's surface, but also to demonstrate that humans could operate safely in lunar conditions. The spacecraft's design included 4 key components: the command module, service module, lunar module, and launch escape system. The astronauts, Commander Jim Lovell, lunar module pilot Fred Hayes, and command module pilot Jack Swigert, sat in the command module, a small cone-shaped capsule containing all navigation, life support, and communication systems. The service module housed oxygen tanks, engines, and power-generating fuel cells. The lunar module was intended to land on the moon, and the launch escape system was designed to carry the crew to safety in case of a rocket accident. Interestingly, none of the 3 astronauts had been the original crew choice for Apollo 13. Circumstances led to their assignment instead. On launch day, around 200,000 spectators watched, far fewer than the 7 million who had witnessed Apollo 11 liftoff. The first 2 days of the mission passed smoothly. Even mundane moments like Swigert realizing he forgot to file his income tax return became memorable, showing that life in space could have ordinary human touches. Then, on April 13th, during a routine check of the oxygen tanks, a massive explosion occurred. One tank was empty, the other rapidly depleting. NASA teams on the ground realized that immediate action was essential to save the crew. Suddenly, what had been considered a routine mission became a life-or-death situation. Investigation later revealed that the explosion was caused by a damaged oxygen tank. Years before, the tank had been dropped during repairs, and the internal wiring insulation was compromised. During routine testing, a heater inside the tank overheated, causing the wiring to spark and eventually explode in space. Thankfully, the explosion occurred on the outside of the service module, preventing total disaster. With their path altered and the main engine near the blast potentially damaged, the astronauts faced 2 options: turn around immediately using the service module engine, or swing around the moon for a longer return. NASA chose the latter and advised the crew to shut down the command module and use the lunar module as a lifeboat. Though it was designed for 2 people for a short period, 3 astronauts would now rely on it for several days. To conserve energy, non-essential systems, including heaters, were turned off. The lunar module's engine was fired twice to adjust the trajectory, allowing them to reach Earth safely, even though the fuel and design were intended for far fewer maneuvers. Another major challenge arose: carbon dioxide levels. The lunar module had filters meant for 2 astronauts for 2 days, not 3 astronauts for 4 days. Using only onboard materials, plastic, duct tape, cardboard, and hoses, the astronauts improvised a device to adapt the command module filters to the lunar module, successfully keeping CO2 levels safe. Every